What's up and welcome to the Flame Wall Archives. And today we're doing a review of the live action How to Train Your Dragon. So, I saw the live action How to Train Your Dragon last Sunday, and let me just say, going into it, I was cautiously optimistic. I was afraid that they would take the story that I love so dearly and would mess it up, because that's what Disney was doing. They were taking stories that people loved and they were just kind of changing them and using them as an experimental playground. What can we do? Which a live action remake of a beloved story is not the place to do that. So I was worried that DreamWorks would do the same thing, that they would go in and say, well, we need to change this, and this about the original story, and then it ends up looking completely different from what we know as How to Train Your Dragon. But I can confidently say now that they did pretty well. They didn't go in and try to change everything or make a completely different movie just with the name How to Train Your Dragon. It was pretty faithful, and I would say well made. I have seen people calling it a shot-for-shot remake, but I'd rather a live-action remake be a shot-for-shot remake than one that drastically changes the original story. So, before I move on, I do want to share with you my two criteria for critiquing live-action remakes, and I will use them to kind of format the video. But I think these two criteria are pretty good because they're simple, but I think a lot falls under them. And it's just a way to kind of organize everything. So, the criteria are, does the film respect and follow the source material? Some adaptations, like the live-action Snow White remake, or really any of the modern Disney remakes, try to change the original story rather than keep true to the original. They try to change the plot in drastic ways. And most of the time, it's things that people loved about the original story. This makes people want to just go watch the original animation instead of the new remake. The second criteria is, if it does add to the source material, does it help it or hurt it? So, for example, the early Disney remake of Cinderella is a phenomenal live-action remake, and it actually really helps the original story because it gives a name to the prince. His name is now Kit. So it humanizes him even more, and so breathes more life into the story and the romance between Cinderella and the prince. So yeah, that's the kind of the criteria that I'm going to be using to evaluate and critique the live action How to Train Your Dragon. So, criteria 1. Does it respect and follow the source material? This movie does respect and follow the source material. I mean, when people say it's a shot-for-shot remake, they're not kidding. It is pretty much a shot-for-shot remake. And you have people who like the movie saying that, and people who didn't like the movie saying that. You have people saying, oh, it's just a shot-for-shot remake, and I'd rather just go watch the animation, which is fine. You have people who are like, this movie is great. It's a great live-action adaptation because it pretty much followed the story, just plot beat for plot beat, and that's also good. It did leave out some things, though. One of them being when Hiccup takes Toothless to the village, and they nearly get caught by Astrid. Now, this isn't a really important thing. I mean, sure, it is a scene in the original animated film, but you still do see how Astrid has a growing skepticism for Hiccup, even in this movie. You know, she sees that he's all of a sudden just leaving the village after the dragon training and just disappearing for most afternoons. So you see kind of that rising curiosity, suspicion, whatever you want to call it, without that scene. But there is a scene that was left out that is extremely important to the plot that I honestly wonder why they left it out. And that scene is in the original animated movie, after Test Drive, Hiccup and Toothless are seen eating fish on a cliff. Now, Toothless is eating raw fish, and Hiccup is, cooking his over a fire when a group of terrible terrors fly down and try to steal Toothless's food. They're the little green dragons. And Toothless pretty much sends a ball of fire down one's throat in this scene, and it kind of groggily walks over to Hiccup, and he says, "Oh, you're not so fireproof on the inside now, are you?" And so this is a small scene, but it's an integral detail to the final battle. You see, when they're falling, or after Toothless's tail has been, blown by or destroyed by the Red Death, he's falling, and then Hiccup eventually, they turn, and Hiccup tells Toothless to, send a ball of flame down the Red Death's throat, and that is what causes it to fall and explode when it hits the ground. So this is an incredibly tiny detail, but an important one to the final battle. And again, why they didn't have this in the original film, I don't know. Or why they didn't have it in the live action, I don't know. Maybe for time. Maybe it's one of them things where, yes, it can technically be overlooked. I don't know, but it does make me go, why? Why did you kind of leave that out? I don't know. It just seems very strange. But those are the only two scenes that were left out. Everything else is pretty much either added stuff or stuff that was in the original. And that's what I think is great about this live action remake, is that when it really mattered, the most important scenes like Test Drive and the Forbidden Friendship, stuff like that, like the songs that we attribute to these scenes, like those scenes are still in there. And that's what is so great about this live action adaptation. Alright, time for criteria 2. If it adds to the source material, do these additions help it or hurt it? Now, a live action adaptation adding to the source material isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like I gave the example of the live action Cinderella earlier in the video. But it has to be done well and thoughtfully. You can't just throw in whatever you want and expect it to help the story or make sense or even people to receive it well. It has to be done meticulously, carefully, and with intention. And I think this movie had its flaws when it came to adding things, but it also did very well with adding other things. Before I talk about the good stuff, though, let me get the flaws out of the way. So, the first thing I'll mention is the scene where they have the council, the Viking council, and you have, of course, the Vikings of Berk, but then there's, the Asian Vikings and the Black Vikings. This, on its own, isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it kind of hints at a broader world where people all over the world are struggling to fight the dragons. But that's all that it does. It hints at something, and really doesn't... The film never really addresses it or even mentions it after that. It just kind of feels like a afterthought or something put in there to kind of check off the boxes to be politically correct, rather than a meaningful part of the story. I think that this could have been done well. I think you could have given some extra backstories to these cultures and how are they dealing with the dragons, or how are they fighting them. It could have really helped. It could have really expanded the film. Now, in the original animated movies, specifically How to Train Your Dragon 2 and 3, we see that the villains come from different villages that also struggle with fighting dragons. Drago loses his arm because of that. Grimmel has a hatred for dragons because of that. Instead of discovering that dragons aren't as bad as the Vikings think they are, Drago and Grimmel instead default to killing them because they're terrible. The dragons are terrible. But yeah, this was just, I think, a missed opportunity, if anything. It could have really helped expand the world of How to Train Your Dragon, but it just kind of fell flat. Another thing that they tried to do something, or that they kind of expanded a bit on, but really didn't, was the scene where Astrid says that she wants to be chief. Well, this opens a whole new can of worms on the political system of Berk. Originally, we kind of assumed that, oh, it's like a royal lineage. You know, you have Stoic, and then eventually the chiefhood is passed on to Hiccup, and that's that. It's just like a royal lineage. And then eventually, at the end of How to Train Your Dragon 3, when you have Hiccup's kids, that Zephyr would be the next chiefess of the village, because she's the firstborn. This is just kind of an assumed thing. However, this line saying, you know, that I'm eyeing your house up there, you know, I'm going to be the next chief. This implies either a more democratic system of political system where they vote for their chiefs, or I mean, really, I don't know what this all hints at, because it's just kind of a one line that, yes, does give more to Astrid's character, where you see she has some sort of ambition to become the next chief of Berk, or it addresses like Hiccup being like the chief's kid, and whereas other Vikings might, if they were as much of a nuisance as he was, they might be sent off to some other island, you know, banished from the village, but because he's the chief's kid, he gets special treatment. So it does help in a lot of those areas, but in the world building sense, it just kind of, you know, makes a lot of questions and doesn't give a lot of answers, because the film never really addresses that later or even says anything about that, so you really don't know much about it. Now, an argument can be made that, you know, the dragon training trials kind of help you gain recognition, respect, and even some may not even see you as a citizen of Berk if you don't pass. So it may be this thing where, like, oh, if Hiccup fails but Astrid succeeds, then she might have a better chance at becoming the next chief of Berk because Stoic has more respect for her. That is a possibility, but again, this isn't made super clear in the film, and I think that they could have done better with that, just showing a more. If you're gonna address a political system, you might want to flesh that out a bit more. That's just kind of my opinion on things. Now for what this film did well. I think it did good answering questions that the original posed but never answered. For example, how did the Vikings get back to Berk after the Red Death had destroyed all their boats? That's just kind of left up to assumption in the original animated film, but this film answers that question. You find out that the Vikings flew on dragons back to Berk. This helps the film in a lot of ways. One, it explains why there's so many dragons on Berk all of a sudden, and that aren't attacking the village. It also explains why the dragons why the Vikings are all of a sudden trustful of the dragons. Hiccup did change their mind, yes, but also that flight back to Berk probably also helped them build a bond and realize that the dragons aren't as bad as they thought. So this kind of just helps that side of things. I also think that the film did a good job of pointing out, or of fixing some plot holes of the original animated film. Now, the original animated film did not have that many plot holes, so it was good that it fixed at least this one. And that was that in the final fight, when the teens are riding the dragons aren't really affected by the control of the queen, the Red Death, in the original animated film. It's like that kind of just goes out the window for a second. Even though Toothless led the Vikings to the nest because of the queen's control. But the live-action remake addresses this twice. Hiccup basically says that the dragons are still vulnerable to the queen's control, so we got to be careful. And then he later, the Stormfly and Astrid are flying so close to the dragon, or the Red Death, that the queen kind of starts trying to control Stormfly, and Astrid's like, come on, fight it. So you see that it kind of raises the stakes of the battle a little bit. And I just really think that was a good addition to the live action, where the animation kind of came short a little bit. The film also adds a level of an extra level or character arc for Snotlout, one that kind of parallels Hiccup's journey a little bit. So these character arcs are both dealing with making their fathers proud. Hiccup does this in a vastly different way from Snotlout, but you see that their arcs kind of parallel in this way. Hiccup begins knowing that he doesn't meet his father's approval, that his father isn't proud of him, and so he tries to rise to the occasion by, I'm going to kill a dragon. I'm going to be accepted by my village, by my father. It's going to be great. It's going to fix everything. And so he's trying to get the acceptance and the approval of his father in that way. Now he eventually learns that his father was wrong about the dragons, and so ultimately he is able to stand up to his father and be like, they're not as bad as we think they are. They've killed, that line where Stoic's like, they've killed hundreds of us, and Hiccup goes, well, we've killed thousands of them. He's able to stand up and be brave and courageous, stand up to his father, and eventually become a leader. And it's that really makes Stoic proud of him. It's that Hiccup becomes a leader. Stoic sees that in him. And then Snotlout is also looking for his father's approval, but Snotlout thinks that he's better than he really is. He overlooks his flaws. He doesn't try to change them. He just kind of, he's gonna bully everybody else, and he's gonna be prideful and all of that, and still wonder why is my father not approving of me? I mean, I'm all this. It's not until later in the film, when Snotlout shows true bravery and true courage, that he receives the approval of his father, Spitelout. So I think it's really good to kind of add an extra level of character to Snotlout and Hiccup, and have the arcs almost like mirroring each other. I just think that was a pretty good addition, and it didn't even take that many scenes to do. It just kind of you kind of got the idea of the family dynamic just through a few lines, and I think that was done excellently. So, in conclusion, I liked this remake. I think it did well sticking to the original story while also adding things. Now, like I've said, it did have its flaws, but there were also several things that it added that I think really helped the story. And I didn't even mention in the video the score. John Powell is just, he comes back again and just brings back the themes that we know and love, and just kind of just tweaks them a little bit, but they're still good. I think the score was phenomenal. Now, I will always think that the original How to Train Your Dragon animated version, it's always going to be better in my eyes. I think that just the lines were delivered with much more heart and emotion, and Hiccup's, just the voice of the Jay Baruchel gave to Hiccup was, it perfectly captured who he was. Just this kind of like awkward kind of kid that, is trying to figure out how to be a Viking, how to be a man, how to be a leader, and then you get to see the story of him become that. And I think that the pacing was just better, even though the movie did follow a lot of the same plot points. I think the pacing in the original animated, because it didn't have these additions, pacing was better. I think that sometimes they try to draw things out or shorten things in this new animation, or this new live action. So while the live action was a bit rocky, I still think it was good. But those are just my thoughts. Why don't you tell me what yours were in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, why don't you, hit that like button and subscribe so you can get more content like this, and then much more. I plan to have book reviews and lore from a fantasy world that I'm developing, and I may cover some lore from my favorite fantasy worlds. I haven't decided yet. So if y'all want a video about, How to Train Your Dragon lore, I'd be happy to do it. So just let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you real soon.